Hi everyone. One of the things that I love and hate about the tech world is that it's so fast paced. You start a new project thinking you're using the latest tech stack, and the next minute there's something new that's more popular and better suited for the job. So I wanted to share with you my tips on how to make big tech decisions that will last. So first, I think when you're wanting to add new tech to your solution and projects is think about the problem that you're trying to solve. Does it help you solve that problem in a better way than any of your existing tech does? Why do you need this new tech? If you're adding tech just for the sake of it, you can end up with an overly complicated project that's really hard to understand and really hard for new developers to pick up. Another thing you'll want to think about when looking at what tech you're going to use is, does it have a big corporate backing? So, for example, you might find a library that does exactly what you need, but there might be another library that does most of what you need and is kind of similar, but it's got a big corporate backing. So you might decide, maybe I'll just use this small library. It seems to be growing in popularity. But I've hit this situation before in my life where this big new project that everyone's excited about just sort of flops and no one's using it, and it doesn't really have any backing to sort of progress it further. So big corporate backing, while it doesn't mean that it's going to succeed as a tech library, does mean that it's got some good minds behind it and some good influences behind it and some good exposure. And you want a lot of developers out there using the tech. Which brings me to my next point, which is about tech community. You want to make sure that there's a large community of developers using the tech you choose. There's a few reasons for that, and one is if you need to hire to grow your team or replace team members, it makes it a lot easier if there's a really large tech community behind this tech you've chosen. And another reason is if you encounter a problem, you can almost guarantee that another developer has also encountered that problem, solved it, and documented it in some way, whether it's a question on Stack Overflow, whether it's an issue against the GitHub repo. You can almost guarantee that you'll be able to find an answer if there's a large tech community, or if not, you'll be able to find someone who will be able to help you figure out an answer. So yeah, I've had this issue before in the past where we were using a tech stack that's not that common, and no one in our team really knew it that well because it was just sort of like a side project that not many people used. But then we wanted to go and make a change. But the problem was the change we wanted to do, we couldn't really find any info on how to do that change. So that's why it's really important to have a good tech community backing the tech that you choose. It also, if it's open source, for example, means that it's going to continue to grow and gain new features and become more stable as bug fixes are added. So yeah, that's another good reason why you want a big tech community. You also want to consider, are there any open issues? Well, there will be probably open issues. How many pieces of software are written with absolutely no bugs? So there will be open issues almost certainly. You want to figure out how many there are, what their severity is, and whether they're likely to affect you and what you require from the piece of tech. It's just good to do your due diligence here and go into it realistically knowing what issues you could face along the way and what pain points other people have had. You also want to look at commit frequency because that will sort of tell you whether people are fixing bugs, adding new features, whether the code's being maintained, maybe old libraries are being updated. So if there's a security vulnerability, you'll want to make sure that someone's there maintaining it, making sure that the vulnerability has been removed from the piece of code. So one of the ways that I check the community side of things, and also the issues and commit frequency, is look at the GitHub repo of the particular software I want to use. It has the license, it has the amount of contributors, it has the issues, it has all sorts of things, number of stars, and you can also look at insights to see a bit more specific. So you can have a look at sort of who's contributing when, how many active issues, how many new issues, and how many closed issues. Even over the period of different weeks, you can adjust it. So yeah, I quite like GitHub for that feature. It's a really useful tool when evaluating what software to use, because you get a pretty realistic view of what problems there are, and it will help you make your decision and be confident in your decision. So another tool that I like to use when evaluating technology is also StackShare. So I'm going to show you a bit about StackShare right now. So StackShare basically compares two pieces of software. So say I was choosing between Flutter and React Native, which I've already done a comparison on, and you can sort of look at to get a rough idea of how I do a comparison. It'll tell you a bit about who's using it, pros and cons, whether developers enjoy using it, a bit about the Git repo stats, a bit about the tech in general. Just it gives you a lot of information that sort of summarizes information from different websites and helps you make your decision. So I really do recommend StackShare if you're trying to make a technical decision. Another thing you need to think about as a developer, if you're making a technical decision that you want to last into the future, is licensing. So different sorts of licenses allow you to do different things. So if you found an MIT or Apache license or a BSD license, those are all pretty good open source licenses that let you use them for commercial use. And I've actually got a video on licenses, so feel free to check that out if you think that would be useful to you. It's really important to know about licenses if you're making technical decisions, because you can get into all sorts of trouble if you don't. For example, you might find a GPL library, and that might require that you open source your own code. If you've got commercial code, you might not be willing to open source it, so you might want to think carefully about whether you want to use a GPL-based library. Hand in hand with licensing is pricing. So you want to check out what sort of pricing a particular piece of tech is going to cost you. So for example, you might choose a UI library that you get a proprietary license, but you have to pay X amount ongoing, or maybe it's a one-off fee. You'll want to factor that in, because that's going to be a cost of you producing and providing the software, especially if you are going to grow your team. A lot of software might license it per developer, and that can get expensive pretty quickly. So it's worth looking at the pricing. I mean, it's pretty obvious, and it will play a reasonably large part in your decision. There's a lot of free software out there, so hopefully you can find something that suits your need. But I mean, there's benefits of the paid software as well, obviously, or it wouldn't exist. Another thing you want to think about is developer experience. So will using this new piece of technology excite developers? The reason you want to think about this is for retention purposes. You don't want to be hiring new software developers all the time, because it'll take a little while to get up to speed, even if your tech stack's relatively normal. It just always takes a little while for people to pick up new projects and sort of find their way. So you want to think about developer experience for retention purposes. And also, developers often like learning something new. They've gotten into this to sort of learn, and it's a fast-paced, changing world, so you want to give them those opportunities to grow. So it's worth trying to keep their experience in mind, as it will sort of benefit them, make them more excited, and may make them even more productive if it's a good experience. Certain languages, for example, will have features that make things really easy, and developers might love them. Other languages, some people might love, but other developers might not. And if you've got lots of developers that don't love some of the languages you've got, that could be a problem. Another thing you'll want to think about is your existing tech stack. So say you've got lots of C# code. You wouldn't want to suddenly add in a random PHP code, because you've got all your C# developers and suddenly you're requiring them to learn a bit of a different skill set. So it's best to try and stick to a similar tech stack. It will mean that your developers are more comfortable moving around between the different projects that you're working on. So that's why I recommend just trying to keep it simple and not overcomplicating things with lots of different languages. You want to sort of stick to a few core languages that the developers can become comfortable with and efficient in, and doesn't require a heap of setup for different projects. Along with that is the tooling available. So that could be the IDEs the developers use to help increase their efficiency. Plugins such as like ReSharper for C# would be pretty useful. SQL Prompt for SQL. And also you want to think like DevOps toolings. How easy is it to automate a build? How easy is it to do automation testing? That sort of thing. You want to make sure that there's good tooling in place that you can write high quality code. Maybe there's some software that can scan your code for security vulnerabilities or for code smells. So yeah, just think about the tooling available, because as you grow as an organization and as your project grows, you'll want to add in more and more sort of measures to protect your code. You'll also want to look at if the company that producing your software is a big one, whether they meet any security standards or compliance standards. So like ISO 27001 is an example of one. You just want to make sure that they've got good processes in place so that they're regularly keeping on top of updates and they're not sort of letting things lag. Because if you're using a library with a vulnerability, that could really open your software up to some vulnerabilities itself. And you don't want to be out of action because there's a vulnerability that could cause some serious leak of data and damage your reputation as a company. So it's good to check that the libraries you're using meet certain security standards, and you can sort of feel comfortable enough in the processes that they're using that you would sort of trust them to be part of your code base. The final thing that I think I like to look at is how good is the documentation. Can a developer that knows very little about this new tech go look at some documentation and reasonably quickly get up to speed and become productive with it? Because you don't want to be digging through the code trying to figure out how do I do this or that. You want to sort of be able to look up some tutorials, get the basics down pretty quickly, and be able to do most things without too much hassle. So when I come to making the decision, I think about all of these different things, and I sort of rank them, whether they are of high importance, medium importance, or low importance. And then I give the tech a score on how well it meets the different criteria. And then I'll score up all the different techs I'm evaluating, and then based on that, I tend to think, okay, is this the tech I want to use? Does it fit well? Is there a particular reason I shouldn't use it? And are there any risks associated with using it over another piece of tech? So once I've done that and weighed it out, I sort of think, okay, that is a tech decision I'm comfortable making. It's hard to know that things are going to always last for the future because it's a fast changing world, but at least this way you can sort of say, I've arrived at this decision through reasonable thought process, and I'm confident that this is the right decision at the moment. You can never know what's in the future, but you can sort of do your best to mitigate risk into the future. I hope this was helpful to you guys, and if it was, please like and subscribe. Thank you.